welcome to Secrets to Success. I'm your host, Oletilwe Ramashala. If you're new to the show, don't worry, you are in good hands. So like and subscribe. Today we're going to be unpacking a beautiful topic that is very dear to my heart, which is reimagining the boardroom for women, as well as leadership insights and lessons from the top. We have a phenomenal powerhouse who I've been stalking for a very long time, a woman that I absolutely look up to. She was the former HR director at JSE, former HR director at the National Treasury, and now she's currently the HR director for Vodacom South Africa. It's none other than Sister Njabulo Mashigo. Sister Njabulo, what an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Oletilwe. Really excited to be here.
Yes. Now, Sister, you wear so many hats. You're a mom, you're a leader. I mean, how do you do it all? And what really inspired you to take a career within the HR fraternity?
Sure, by God's grace. And I think just really taking each moment as it comes, that's just the truth about doing it all. So yes, I am a mom to a 19-year-old young lady. So not a baby. So I'm very grateful to be at this stage from a life perspective. I also get to enjoy a really awesome corporate career. HR, how did I end up in HR? I would say HR found me. So really, even when I got to university, I never imagined I would end up in HR. I studied journalism and psychology.
Really? Wow.
And I think it was only halfway through my first year that I understood that there was specialization in psychology, got exposed to all the different fields, and eventually came across industrial psychology, which is how I got into HR.
Yeah. Sure. I think I had a stint in HR. I was an executive associate, and I was just for like 3 months, and I was like, this is a lot.
I was going to ask, what were your impressions of it?
No, so you guys, I honestly, I think it's quite a tough and it's like the heart of the organization, because you deal with very sensitive issues from the top across, and I just think it takes a very special person to actually, carry that journey. So I really admire that about you. But let's unpack the topic for today, which is reimagining the boardroom for women. Now, I'm unapologetic about women having a seat at the table, especially women of color, and that is the premise of why this podcast started. Because when I started, I felt like I didn't have a voice, within corporate. I slowly found my voice when the imposter syndrome slowly got down. Yeah. But really, in your experience, how can the boardroom better reflect the diverse world we live in, particularly in terms of gender and cultural representation?
So over the years, I've actually I would say my interest in this discussion around diversity, inclusion, and why it matters. I came across, I think, something that just really sums it up for me. Yeah. There's an international coach. His name is Matthew Cahill, and he says, if you've got a brain, you've got a bias.
Wow.
And I think that helps because sometimes we assign bias and stereotypes to certain groups, particularly in South Africa, where South Africa is racially charged. We think only certain groups feel a certain way about certain people. But the truth is, for all of us, we have a way of just shortcutting through life. Imagine every time you had to go to a traffic light, you have to think green means go. And what does amber mean? What does red mean?
That's true.
It doesn't work like that. Our brains create shortcuts so that we can go through life. And the unfortunate part is in doing that, we exclude certain things. And so diversity does matter. And so if we're saying businesses, boardrooms are about representing societies and communities that we're a part of, then the boardrooms must also reflect that. And if anything, it's just to really break our own biases, make sure that we just have as many views as possible, and we start to actively, intentionally create inclusion. I think that's more probably on the why it matters. I would say in terms of the what and the how, in terms of addressing diversity issues, there's lots of opportunities. I think, we just need strategies where I always say you have to go soft and hard. Soft just being maybe more on the, what do we stand for from a values perspective, creating an open environment where people feel that they can fit. But the hard is also important, where you actually need to have practices and policies that reflect what you say you want.
Yeah. That's so true. And how do you believe boardrooms can evolve to be more agile and innovative in addressing modern business challenges?
Yeah. I actually think we don't have much of a choice these days. Yeah. The truth is, we've passed that stage where we say there's a VUCA world, it's volatile, uncertain. It's just the reality of our everyday life. And I think traditionally boardrooms, we've thought about them as, because it's a governance space and it's about maintaining, direction, it has to be stiff. But the reality is agility, we don't have a choice about it. So it's really balancing, I would say. How do you bring in the flexibility to iterate on your strategy, to run experiments, to just do different things that challenge how you possibly see the world? Boardrooms have to innovate these days. We have to invite other voices. And I think a good way to introduce agility is also just inviting spaces for collaboration. So people who would typically not be in the boardroom, how do you bring their voice into the boardroom? How do you bring the voice of the customer, whoever it is that you are really trying to understand and unlock for? If it's employees, how do we put ourselves in the shoes of the employees before we solve for this issue and maybe even co-create a solution, taking their views into account?
I love that. Now, I didn't think of this, but now as you're speaking, I'm hearing diversity, but I'm also hearing different ages. Like there's millennials, there's, baby boomers, there's generation, is it X? I always get confused, but I'm a millennial, right? Yeah. So then how do you ensure that, the power in the differences of these people can then come together and, co-create and shape the organization's vision?
Yeah, I think firstly is recognizing that we are having these multi-generational corporates now. Yes. So just the first part is just recognizing that and then being intentional about actually having people in the boardroom that represent all those different generations. And I think an important one, which I've been speaking about quite a bit lately, is the fact that different generations do perceive diversity and inclusion issues quite differently. I think the older generations have been more focused on the outside appearances. Do we have all the different looking people, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether people with disabilities? But the younger generations, the newer generations, millennials, Gen Zs, are really asking about the invisible differences. So we can have two Black women, but are we the same? Are we looking at things from the same perspective? And how are we going to start exploring these other ways that people show up cognitively, but also just in their view of the world in general? And so it is a big challenge. Now, maybe not everybody can be literally in the same boardroom, but we need to find ways to bring the insights. How do we document the lived experiences of those generations in our corporates and our organizations so that we make sure that whatever solutions we come up with actually take that into account.
Wow. And then in what ways has your presence, this one I love, as a female leader reshaped or influenced dynamics in the boardroom?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about it because I think one of the things that strike you when you enter the boardroom, at first you might feel, particularly if maybe you're in the minority from a gender perspective, you might feel this is a completely different world. Yes. But very quickly, particularly when there are men who are allies, you realize that there are many things to draw strength from each other from, and you might be more like-minded than not. But I've found that a very obvious one is probably just around emotional intelligence. And it's not to say male colleagues aren't. I just think it's a strength that many women bring much more naturally. Yeah. And then it also brings, it calls for a different conversation, because sometimes there's also stereotypes associated with emotions. And I always say emotions in and of themselves are not the issue. Yeah. It's more about what are the emotions telling you, what is behind the emotions. And that's really the power of emotional intelligence, because it's not only understanding your emotions, but also how you potentially impact other people. And in that sense, I do think it's one of the strengths that women bring. Collaboration is actually also something which women tend to bring to the fore in terms of how can we co-create, how can we think a bit more long-term. And those are just some of the things which I've found that women just seem to more naturally aspire to say, how does this benefit the bigger group? What about the long-term impact? And all of us should be thinking about that.
That's so true. That's so true.
Yeah.
Now let's delve into leadership insights and lessons from the top, your personal lessons from the top, right? Yeah. What are the most valuable lessons you've learned about navigating power dynamics in leadership?
Yeah. I think the biggest one is just even understanding the concept of power dynamics.
Yeah.
I think quite often as leaders, we underestimate the shadow that we cast. I always say, as a leader, you cast a very long shadow. You usually don't have to come and introduce yourself and say, I'm Njabulo so-and-so. People generally know who the leadership is and whatever they might in their minds associate with leadership. And so to be conscious of that, to say whether you want to or not, you are the system, you impact the smell of the place. And for me, those have been some of my biggest, lessons, because sometimes we shy away from owning our leadership space and I just want to work hard and get on with it. But whether you are doing it consciously or unconsciously, there is a perception about you. There is a leadership profile that is associated with you. And so for me, one of my biggest lessons has been, if then I do have this power and influence, how do I consciously use it for the greater good, to impact things, to influence things? And sometimes it's a muscle that you just need to build and exercise over time. Yeah.
Say the shadow thing again one more time.
Yeah.
Because that was powerful.
Yeah, it's really that as leaders, we cast a long shadow, and we do, and we don't always realize it. And it's part of the burden of leadership, but it's part of the privilege as well, to say there's great responsibility that is associated with leadership.
How you shape the culture.
How you shape the culture,
How people's lived
and
experiences.
exactly, particularly people's lived experiences. It's something that in my senior years I've definitely become much more conscious of. And not just as a leader of the people agenda, I just think as a leader in general, because the more senior you become, it's less about your technical abilities, but really about the people, because you're literally delivering results through others. So what is the impact on people and their lived experiences at the end of the day?
Sure. Wow, I could listen to you for the whole day, Sister Njabulo, because the things that you're sharing is just like, wow. So now, leadership is challenging. I remember my late uncle used to say to me, some people are born leaders. Leadership is a skill, and some people, you acquire it along the way. And I think I'm a bit of both, because not every day is the same, and you just come up with different challenges along the way. So my question is, can you share a defining moment in your career where you had to assert your leadership vision in a challenging situation?
Sure. Yeah. One of my most defining, I would say, moments in my career was actually when I worked at the JSE. And I had just started, and at the time, the only African female on the exco.
Sure.
And I remember, and also maybe I should add the age factor. I think if I was not 29, I just turned 30. And that was, and I remember up until that point, I had developed my own narrative in my mind where I'd seen sometimes people who were very passionate about the inclusion agenda, the equity agenda, feeling like sometimes they're so loud about it that it might take away from everything else that they bring, And why I share that is when I then got to the JSE, which was very white, and my CEO had also just recently been, promoted into her role.
Sure.
And I remember saying to her, when I just started to experience people, maybe writing letters anonymously, sending me messages to say, we're so glad to have a woman of color, so young. Please change the organization. We want to see more of us in the core of the business. I was like, the pressure. And again, being young, I myself, I'm feeling I need to prove that I'm worthy of being here. I've earned my seat at the table. I'm paddling, and I'm like, I'm not here to be a freedom fighter. I'm here to prove that I'm actually here because I'm top talent. I'm the best at what I do. But as this pressure mounted, and I kept on getting people saying this to me. I remember actually having, honestly, I would say one of the most profound discussions of my career. So I approached Nikki Newton-King. She was the CEO, and I said to her, you are the CEO. This is your organization. You should do something about this. just be aware that this is what's happening,
Sure.
And she said, as a newly promoted CEO, I would love for people just to say the transition from Russell, who was the previous CEO, to myself was so smooth. Everything was so elegant, and things are just on the up and up. But you know what people actually fixate about? A female CEO, and she's brought on so many women on Exco. And the truth, Njabulo, is it's me, and at the time, Maria Ramos at ABSA, it's me and Maria in the financial services space. And so over and above, showing up for my new CEO role, doing it to the best of my ability, I actually do need to, I am a role model.
Yeah.
And I can show women that actually women can do these kind of roles. And how do we create more spaces for women in financial services? So Njabulo, my dear, yes, you are a top talent, and that's why you're here, and that's why you got this role. You also, though, happen to be young, Black, and female. And how are you going to bring all of these things? You don't have to choose to be, am I freedom fighting, or am I being a top talent HR person? And you are the custodian of the people agenda. And I remember thinking, yeah, that's true. And I had to go on my own journey, of saying, why does it scare me? And I answered those questions because I'm relatively new and at this level. So I still want to prove myself. I'm still young. Yeah. But the truth is, I am in the room and I do have a seat at the table. And how do I use the seat at the table to influence the discussions? And just over time, I just gained that confidence of saying, nobody's born understanding capital markets and commodities. So why don't we have more people of color? Because those are some of the reasons why people are saying, oh, we try, but we can't find the people. And, I was like, actually, one of my strengths is talent management. Here's how you build succession. Let's start a bursary program. Let's actually take people from the banks who have 60% of what we're looking for, and we fill the 40% gap. Wow. And just through that intentionality and using my strength and not shouting and in my mind how I understood being a freedom fighter, but actually by putting tools on the table, using my skill and my knowledge. And that was profound because I think over the years now, today, 12 years later almost, people can say, wow, you're so confident, you're so passionate about inclusion, you're so clear. It's really been built over time, that confidence to be able to stand for something, but also have something to back it up and know that I'm not just being political. I'm actually using my power, my seat for good. I'm creating awareness with my colleagues, allyship, getting them to recognize the strength that they have and what they can do to contribute to this agenda. And for me, that was so game-changing. Because you can sit and complain, or you can even hide and not say anything, but feel a certain way, or maybe not even admit.
It's like now you're betraying the woman.
Exactly.
Yeah. You've also got these pressures.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a story, but certainly one that for me has always created, even just, I think emotionally, that connection with that moment. I think with Nikki herself, just saying you can be all of it, not just a part of it.
What I love about that story, Sister Njabulo, is that it was a vulnerable moment.
Yeah.
You were honest to say this is what's happening, but she allowed you the space to actually own it and take ownership of what was happening and rectifying it. And I think that's so powerful because I remember sitting at one of these industry events and Dr. Judy Dlamini was actually, someone asked her women of color, they don't lift as they rise or they, and Dr. Judy said, but guys, have you ever wondered what that woman is going through? Yes. Have you actually sat and said, can I help you in this agenda? Yes. Because you don't know the fires that she, first of all, has to fight. And I'm thinking, you're 29, Njabulo. I won't reveal my age, but hey, 29 is wow, that's young. I look at it as it's great because you're young, fearless. There's not a lot of, because the older we get, I think sometimes for me, I found that you're more cautious, right? Whereas when you're younger, you're more free to actually make the mistakes and then fail forward, right? Yeah. So wow, that's quite profound in terms of how you streamline processes and put things in place and almost gradually push the agenda without the freedom fighter, but still people felt heard and the change was felt. Okay, this is a good one. What have you observed to be the most common leadership blind spots in boardrooms, and how can they be addressed?
Yeah. I think the first one is what I touched on a little bit in terms of my biggest leadership lessons, which is really leaders not understanding the impact that they have.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a big blind spot. I think a big one, another big one rather, is indecision. I think not having a stance, not having a sense of direction can keep you spinning. And a big part of leadership is decision making, and it's not easy to make decisions. We all have our own maybe experiences and formulas that we've developed over time, but just taking a stance, leading in a direction, it just creates momentum. And a lot of leaders underestimate the impact of just not making choices, not making decisions. Sometimes, maybe unconsciously, it's fear. Consciously, maybe they, consulting and over consulting and spinning, not making choices. That's quite a big one. Emotional intelligence, which is one that we touched on also a little bit. I do think a lot of leaders tend to be, still today, unfortunately, promoted because of their technical ability. But the truth is, the more senior you become, life is about many other things other than your specialization or the fields that you've emerged from. It becomes very much about people, sometimes about budgets, about other things. And I think on the people side, that journey around understanding that you have to deliver through other people, and therefore just that emotional intelligence of what will that take? Not everybody thinks like you. People have different contexts of where they're coming from. And so if you're not consciously trying to find ways to connect with people, you're actually going to leave people behind.
I like that because there's a shift in your career. I mean, you were very fortunate to be holding these positions at a very young age. But I want to go back to that young Njabulo who shifted from maybe heading up a talent division or heading up, a division within the HR space to now you're a manager of manager. You're a leader where you are leading, like you're saying, through people. Yeah. How did you mentally position yourself or prepare yourself? Because you're saying you have to have a stance, you have to have a direction, and that creates momentum. So how did you then prepare yourself for that shift?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I was entirely prepared. And some things you do learn by doing. Yes. But that's such an important question. In fact, I think I always say to my team, there's such a huge space in the world of corporates around transition coaching. When you transition from one level to another, quite often we start as individual contributors, then you become a manager of others, a manager of managers, a manager of enterprise, etc. And in that journey, there are key gates, in terms of what brought you here is not going to take you there. And sometimes people holding on to their spreadsheet that made them famous, like, no, you did it so well. That is why. That's why you actually now, so now you can leave it. Now let's enter into this. But it's a comfort zone thing. It's like, this is what has made me famous. And I'm holding on to my process and I'm holding on to how I do things. And that's where a lot of leaders actually struggle. And so I don't know if so I also went through my own journey of learning by doing, sometimes holding on to the work. And then, which was another interesting one, is then sometimes letting go of the work. So in the sense that you've given conceptually, this is where we're going, and then you start moving, and then you look back, you're like, okay, are you coming along? And those are things that you learn over time to say, what is that balance between not holding on or micromanaging, but also not letting go in such a way that you are disjointed from your team. So I think leading people who are executives in their own rights or managers themselves requires definitely trusting people, but also making sure that there's enough of a connection and a closeness that you're still aligned in terms of the direction that you're going. It's something that you definitely learn with practice. I can tell you from my first HR director role to where I am today, it's very different. In terms of, the structures that you put in place, the momentum to make sure you stay connected, but give the room, give the space. I would say the most important thing is learning yourself actually initially. Who am I as Njabulo, as a person, my preferences? Where do I potentially trip myself up? How can my team help me? Because if you know, then you also are able to leverage that team of managers to be able to compensate, and so that as a whole, you're actually able to deliver what you need to.
Sure. I think what I'm hearing from you, because I'm seeing a bit of me in like those transitionings, right? Where you're a manager of managers. Anyway, but I'll get there. But I'm still a manager of people. And I'm thinking still the transition from one organization to another is not so easy, because you first need to observe for the first 6 months while you're doing, but like learning how, you know, the rules of the game here. You can't take the rules of the game there and try and implement them here, although the companies are very similar. So so what sort of courses would you recommend for people who are doing that transition? I know you're saying there's transitional coaching or coaching sessions, but are there courses that you've maybe taken along your journey that you feel have equipped you as you were transitioning into these different hats?
Yeah. I think, there was one famous Harvard Business Review, HBR article that I hung on for many years, where it was just really talking about this transition from manager of self to manager of others, because it's genuinely a transition. But in terms of courses, I would say it really depends on your, because again, we've all been exposed to different things, and you might come with a strength of, for example, dealing with ambiguity. And for other people, it's something that they need to practice, especially in this fast-paced world. But courses such as self-mastery, are quite important, because even in managing and leading others, it starts with you knowing your strengths, because even in how you lead others, you would know, maybe I'm not a structured person, and how do I leverage team members who are actually very good on structure? I can set direction and say conceptually this is going, but also maybe I'm not a creative person, and how do I leverage the creative people? So I think knowing and understanding yourself helps you, one, to even communicate back to your team and say, this is the help that I need as your leader. And that requires a level of vulnerability, because maybe some leaders, and that's very dated, if you still believe you have to have all the answers. There's certainly competencies, and I would say abilities that you would need to have above your team, which is probably why you are the leader. However, you don't have to know everything. And so for me, in terms of what people need to be exposed to, I would say the more time you spend in getting to know yourself, befriending yourself, embracing the things that are not your strength, and not just for fixing sake, but to then say, how do I build a support system for myself? Because I'm going to spend the next 20 years trying to be something that maybe you'll never be. Or you could actually say, I'm happy with this 80, with this 70%, and the other things which I believe are critical for my success, I'm going to find them in this way, by building this in my team, by investing in it, because that's the truth around success. Nobody has it all. But people who really succeed are people who actually know themselves very well and who build a structure and a support to enable them to succeed.
You hit it on the nail. I feel like you're talking to me, because
I'm glad.
I promise you, because I've had these sessions, and I think in most of my sessions with my leaders, they're like, you're too hard on yourself. You're too hard on yourself. We hired you because we know you're good at this. You don't need to, exactly what you're saying. So knowing yourself, knowing your strengths, and then hire for your gap. You don't have to. And that's why you're very good with vision, strategy, taking people, but you're not a structured person. And I always thought that you have to be structured. And my current manager, whom I absolutely adore, would be like, stop it. That's not who you are. And that's not what we hired you for. Hire for your gap, and hearing it from you, it's almost like replaying it to be like, okay, Uli, you
I'm
don't
very
have to
happy about that.
Yes,
and it's honestly part of the privilege of getting into the senior levels, I think there's certain levels where, so I remember, I would say my profile, even as a junior person, because of course you do have core inherent traits or abilities, was always that I was conceptual and I could reason in terms of strategy. But when you're in junior roles, that's not necessarily a great profile. And I remember one of my managers, when I was still coming up, she used to say, Njabulo, you're in the clouds, come back, come back. And so I did a lot of work, and I was super intentional around execution. What does execution look
Look
like?
like.
And not because I'm lazy, I can't execute, but because I would run away into, and then we could do this and the strategic, and it was like, that sounds amazing. But
you are here. Like,
and
you're a
yeah,
doer.
and thankfully, I've managed to get into the senior leagues where it is a strength to be able to be strategic and to be conceptual. But now I've also built this muscle over years, and that balance between you can stay in the clouds or you can actually implement this and you can make it successful. So everybody must go through their journey and you must do the work. And I just wanted to say it's not always maybe the other way around. It can be you've got the latent potential, but today we are here. And how do you show up here?
No, you're right. When are you writing your book? I'm like, wow, this is like, you know what? One of my dreams, to be quite honest with you, is all these documentaries, having a chapter dedicated to people who actually shared on the podcast. Because people have different insights. And this, I'm telling you, is going to be a chapter in my book where you're going to be featured.
I love it.
Talking about this, because I feel like coming into the corporate world, I learn through others. I learn through other people's journeys and stories. I mean, that analogy of, yes, strategy and stuff, but remember there's the execution part and putting that balance. So that's very profound. Talking about being vulnerable as a leader, because that's what you're giving me. Like, you're very vulnerable. You know yourself. You know the developmental areas that you've had to work on. So how do you personally stay this grounded and maintain authenticity as a leader in high-stake environments?
Yeah, for me personally, it's really been remaining curious is the one thing. I've never felt I've reached a level where I now know everything.
Yeah.
I think, of course, conceptually, there are things which you will master and get to a good comfort level.
Yeah.
But I think keeping yourself curious, keeping yourself fresh in terms of what else is happening in the people agenda, in my area of expertise, and surrounding myself with people who give me feedback. That's very important. And having young people in our team, I think it's different things for me. I think young people just remind you of the reality and burst your bubble to say that's aged, that doesn't work anymore. Or having peers and people who can give you feedback, it just keeps you grounded and just and that authenticity is so important, because one of the biggest traps for leaders is just being out of touch. And you are busy moving along thinking people are following you, and instead the gap is growing wider. And you have to be intentional about, when you keep looking back, making sure you're bringing people along, sometimes walk behind, push people along, whatever it takes, but you just have to consciously do that. I think that's really what's important.
So I've got 2 more questions and then I'm going to have to wrap up. Time flies so quickly, right? Looking back on your journey, what would you say is the most critical skill or mindset that helped you thrive at the top?
Believing in myself and befriending myself. And it sounds very, like cliche almost, but the truth is
Befriending yourself.
Getting to know yourself and really, really, really becoming a friend to yourself is so important, because as you move through different contexts, maybe it's changing organization, maybe it's different levels, you're also going to come across different people. And if you don't have a very strong sense of self or a locus of control, or just a higher belief in who you are and what you're about, it's so easy to be derailed. You get to an environment and people say, yeah, you're not so great. And you're like, oh, I'm not so great. And then someone says, you're a star. And you're like, I'm a star. And if you're going to ping pong and rely on just that external validation, you're going to be lost. And I think, of course, you should, and this is why the vulnerability and authenticity and having the right support system is important, because it's not necessarily about having, this crazy self-belief where maybe you become arrogant. So get feedback, reflect on it. But when you have your own internal guide as well, in terms of how much of this do I want? This is input. And I'm taking all these puzzle pieces to put this picture together for myself. That is so important, because it's very easy to get lost in the noise, a different corporate culture, a new CEO, a different manager, what your team said about you. All of it is input, but you always have to don't run away from the work of interpreting it and saying, what does it mean to me and for me? And you can discard what you don't want, take what you can, and always just make sure that you're moving. Yeah.
So I know the chapter, Know Thyself. Featured by you, Sister Njabulo. That's so powerful. That's so powerful. And then just one more that I want to sneak in before the final question. You touched on allyship, and the importance of it in a boardroom, right? And I always lead with this question around mentorship, allyship in the boardroom.
Yeah.
How do you then develop that over time? How do you, create that space where you do have allies in a boardroom so that you know that, you've got that backing when you are trying to, put a certain agenda.
Yeah. I think, it comes back to, I guess, one of our favorite words we've established, which is vulnerability, to open yourself up to, if it's in the boardroom, to your colleagues. More times than not, we actually have more in common generally as people. And certainly if you're in the same boardroom, in the same organization, you should be, at least from an alignment and a strategy point of view, trying to get into the same direction. So the work is really about understanding, how are you trying to get there? How am I trying to get there? And consciously do the work of saying, then perhaps this is where we could meet one another. Allyship is also about understanding the power that you possess and how you can use it, firstly, to create space for other people who might not enjoy the same power. I think if I just use a simple example as generally Black women in society, they really get the raw deal in terms of just their experiences, right? And it's true as a statement, but then if you say, okay, then let's apply it to where's Ole on her journey, where's Njabulo, I enjoy a different privilege of being, yes, I am a Black woman, but I'm also a director. I'm also at a particular level in my career. And so I do have a different power dynamic, and I could use it differently to maybe the average Black woman in South Africa. And how do I do that to create space for them? In fact, one of the best courses we've ever done in our organization, according to me, was called Withstander training. And it was being a withstander versus being a bystander. And the whole program was around allyship, to say things happen around us all the time, and you can choose to be a bystander and just watch it happen, or you can be a withstander. And so conceptually, it is about saying in every situation, you could enjoy a different dynamic from a power perspective. Maybe you can't do anything to save that person in that moment, but do you afterwards go and raise the issue? Do you comfort the person? Do you confront the person who was the aggressor? But what are you doing as a withstander? Whether it's in relation to identity issues, LGBT+, or whether it's power dynamics in an office, quite often we witness things and we choose to do nothing about it. So allyship, sponsorship.
Or we do too much about
we
things.
Do too much about things. Exactly. That's also true. And so where is that balance of support? And that's important actually, but actually still allowing people to grow and to own their own issues. So allyship is quite broad, but it's honestly saying we can all do something about the situation, whatever that is, but understanding the role that you can consciously and actively play. Yeah.
Wow. No, that's powerful. Lastly, what advice would you give to other leaders about balancing strategic foresight with staying adaptable to change?
Yeah. I see those as tied to each other, to be honest. I think strategic foresight obviously is about the long term, and it's about keeping the main thing. Yes. And that matters a lot because it gives you a sense of direction. You're able to really look into the future. But from an adaptability perspective, the truth is the world is changing all the time. And you should not be so married to your future plan that you don't have room for flexibility. So I think for me, it's quite important. And I suppose that's why even when you've got a 2030 strategy, 2040 strategy, you will still have annual reviews, biannual reviews. And it's really about checking, are we still on course for the main journey? But at the same time, maybe we need to adapt and do something now in the short term Maybe we need to have a freeze on the budget. Maybe we need to take a different direction to still get us to where we want to. So I see them as partners, that duality of it's good to have the long-term perspective, but it's also important to just maintain the flexibility of checking in and making sure that are we still on the right track? Are we still gonna get there? How we thought we were gonna get there? And different leaders have different journeys to walk on that, because some people are quite rigid. We're going this way, and because this is the end goal.
And then some people are too
consultative, too much flexibility. People lose that sense of direction, and are we still? And so it's that balance of we anchoring people into this is the big picture and where we're going, but how we get there is where there is the room, the freedom within a framework in terms of what it will take for us to get there. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much for being on the show, Sis Njabulo. I'm sure our listeners and viewers can attest to the fact that this has been really, truly life-changing. I think what stands out for me is being a stander or bystander, that we all have a choice, and actually looking at leadership from a different lens to say you've been given that privilege and you have the choice to make it, make something of it, and also knowing yourself. That's the most powerful thing that you've said to me, to say, don't look for external validation, because you'll just be spinning around. Know who you are and what value you bring to the table.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Well, that was Sis Njabulo Mashigo, the HR Director of Vodacom South Africa, on reimagining the boardroom for women and her personal insights from lessons from the top. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, it's me, Oletilwe Ramashala, on Secrets to Success.
Reach for the stars.